An INFJ INTP relationship. Is this the most compatible pair for these types, or is it a bit of fool's gold? Let's get into it. All right, so let's look at an INFJ INTP pair, and if this is a really good pairing. It's often considered the most compatible pair for these two personality types, and we'll take a look at their functions and see how that works. INTPs with TINESIFE and INFJs with NIFETISE. So let's dive into it. There's an intuitive spark between these types. They're both N types. They have introverted thinking as well and extroverted feeling in their ego, so they're very similar in those ways. They want to make people feel better. They have a lot of thoughts. They analyze things very deeply with a very intuitive perspective. And they speak the same language. They have abstract ideas, abstract logic. They try and analyze things. They come up with new things that are possibly true. And so they can be pretty similar in that way. They're also both introverted. So they analyze their inner worlds a lot. They're very introspective. They're always thinking. They're always thinking about who they are. They're always thinking about what they want. They're always kind of analyzing these ideas. So they can be pretty similar in that way. And that's a lot of their, similarities come from that thinking, come from that abstract language. So what's the problem? That sounds like they're pretty similar. Well, there are some differences as well. INTPs are more prioritizing truth over emotion. They have that TI hero, FE in that fourth slot, and they're prioritizing what is true. They're not always sharing their feelings. They're not always wanting feelings to be discussed. They think they can sometimes get in the way and be unnecessary. They're really trying to find that absolute truth. They're not always looking for that morality. They're really just trying to find that sincerity. And they prioritize that over emotions. Whereas INFJs, they want to know how other people feel. They want to be able to contribute to other people, make people feel better. They want to try and understand other people's morals, understand other people's values, their priorities, what they think is good, what they think is bad. And INTPs don't always care about what is good or bad. They care about what is true or false. They're very analytical. Whereas INFJs, they appreciate other people being a little bit more emotional. They want people who are, care about that social world, who are more like F types. INFJs, on that other hand, lead with that kindness and diplomacy, trying to be diplomatic, say what they think, but understand how people feel, understand people's values, understand where people are at, what they might believe. Whereas INTPs, they lead in a different way. They lead with that brutal honesty. They want to be listened to. They want their thoughts to be heard. And, they don't always care about brutal honesty because they have low introverted feeling. They're not always going to have emotional reactions to things. So INTPs, they really want to be listened to. Whereas INFJs, they're not thinking as much about listening to people's thoughts. They're more thinking about how they can empathize with people's feelings. So INFJs have a slightly different perspective there. Whereas INTPs, they just want to be heard. They want people to think things through, have that very pragmatic, intellectual focus. Whereas INFJs are more about the social world. They're more about the utopian focus, thinking about how to improve social relationships, social connection, intimacy, emotional vulnerability. And these are just kind of different focuses these two types have. So when they're together, there can be a little bit of a clash there. Yeah, INTPs, they're intellectual types. They're NT types. They value careers. They value finances, money, knowledge. These are the thinking focused ways INTPs think. They prioritize, your job, your purpose. They prioritize those things, as a paramount focus. And they do so in a very pragmatic, independent way, doing what works, finding the best way to do something, the best systems to create that specific lifestyle where they're pursuing knowledge, they're pursuing, the career, whatever that may be. INFJs, on the other hand, are relationship focused. They value people, they value love, connection. They really care about the social world. INFJs believe that the most important thing is the people in their life, whereas INTPs sometimes have a different focus there. So slightly different focuses can create some tension as well. INFJs are also really team oriented. They like to work with other people. They're affiliative. They like to, understand how people feel, work with other people. They're focused on drawing out emotions, understanding people. The counselor type, they want to counsel people's emotions, understand people's problems, understand people's issues. INTPs, they don't always want to talk about their issues. They don't want to be helped. They don't want to be counseled. They want to do things independently. They're focused on pure logic. They're focused on, what is really true. And while these types can have that similar focus, which can help in a relationship, INFJs aren't going to necessarily feel like they're able to help the INTP, and they're able to understand their feelings, and they don't really know where they're at emotionally. And INTPs may feel like INFJs are too focused on working in a team. They're not independent enough. They're not focus enough on listening and evolving these ideas, and they're worried too much about the social world and being nice and diplomatic and understanding. And INTPs can sometimes feel like there's just a little bit of a clash between them in a relationship. So what is there in a relationship between an INFJ and an INTP if they do have some similarities but some pretty big differences? They still have a base level physical, sexual compatibility. If they're in a romantic relationship, they have those perceiving function compatibility. So they have that physical compatibility. That is still pretty good. And I use the puzzle piece to demonstrate that because, of course. So they need to understand emotional, intellectual needs and in order to kind of work in a relationship, because that's their big hangups. They do have that intimate compatibility. They can feel that. It feels good. But then they need to understand their emotional needs as well. There's a little bit of a disconnect there. INFJs, they always want to feel like they're contributing to someone's emotional state, whereas INTPs, they just don't want to share their emotions. And that can be a little bit of a problem, where an INFJ might just keep drawing out their negative emotions, and it just makes them feel bad, and then they don't feel good about the relationship. Whereas on the other hand, the INTP might be so honest, they might always share what they think, and the INFJ is like, why is this person criticizing me? Why are they being so brutal and straight to the point? Don't they want to talk more about emotions and understand how we feel about this? And so that can be a bit of a disconnect there. And that can lead to a struggle with intimacy and emotional connection long term, where these people might feel like, yes, we have fun together, we can make each other laugh, we're very similar, but I don't quite understand how you feel about me. Are you in love with me? Do you like this? What do you value? And they're wanting that energy from the other person. They might also feel like they're not being heard. They're both introverted thinking users, which means they like to say what they think, and they might argue a lot. They might have a lot of debates, which isn't always a bad thing, but they might feel like the other person doesn't agree with them. They're always taking the other side. They're always thinking something different. They're not hearing their thoughts, and that can be pretty frustrating if they both want to be the one to be the thinker. And they can sometimes feel a little too similar to work together. There can be some of those differences getting in the way, and there can be some of those similarities getting in the way, where they're both wanting to be alone. They're both introverted types. They might want to process their world. They might just want to share what they think and not how they feel. They want to be independent from each other sometimes and maybe be disagreeable, and that can be a problem. INFJ might want more emotional connection and to be more affiliative and work with them, whereas the INTP wants more freedom. They want more independence potentially, where they might not always want to have to be as clingy in a relationship. So that can be an emotional problem as well. So is this relationship really the best pairing for these types, or is this kind of a fool's gold? Perception compatibility, as I said, NESI and NISC, that's great. So half the way there, that's pretty good. INFJs make, the decisions. They like to have that independent decision making. INTPs don't mind advising decisions and kind of going along with what other people want. INFJs do try and entertain, have that good shared experience, and INTPs do remember those fondly and go along with them, and they can be loyal to those experiences. So that's good there. But there are some emotional and intellectual struggles. There's also some temperament incompatibility, right? So INFJs focused on being idealistic and hopeful for the future and their relationships in the social world. INTPs a little more pessimistic, a little bit more individual, independent focus, focused on career, finances, knowledge, different things. There's also some interaction style incompatibility. An INFJ is a finisher type, trying to finish tasks. INTPs, they're background types. They like to quietly support things from the background. Not necessarily a big problem, but they are both introverts. They can sometimes have a difficult time bringing up new topics in conversation, bringing up new ideas. So that can be a little bit of a problem in a relationship. So there's a mix, similarities, differences, a little bit of both. We have some final thoughts. So should these types be together? Should INTPs and INFJs be together? Are they the most compatible? No. Does that mean they can't make a relationship work? No, they're still, in the top 5 realm of compatibility between the 16 types. They're still a pretty good pair. They have a lot of similarities. They have some compatibility, and they have some differences. But depending on nurture experiences, these differences can feel like less of a big deal, and they can definitely get along. They both must be focused on things like communication, on things like openness. INFJ focusing on being a little bit more, independent, a little more pragmatic. Maybe being willing to listen to other people's ideas, being a little bit more flexible with that. INTPs learning to maybe speak their emotions a little bit more, be a little bit more willing to engage in that emotional world. And there must be some compromise, learning of a different method. INFJs prioritizing, feelings first, diplomacy, and then having what they have to say be spoken. Whereas INTPs, they like to say what they think. They like to just be honest, and then they like to worry more about people's feelings second. Learning from these different methods and having that mutual respect. And there's many different situations where these types can work together. It could be friendships, it could be coworkers, and it can even be a romantic relationship. They definitely can get along on a pretty good level still. So a little bit of a mix on this one. While this isn't the most compatible pair where everything just lines up, they can definitely work together. They can have a good relationship if they work on these few key issues. So let me know in the comments down below if you're either of these types, what you think about this pairing. Thank you so much for watching to this final level. It's been 10 minutes or something. Please subscribe down below as well and like the video if you can, as it helps the channel. And I hope you all have a great day.